So, you might be thinking to yourself, no, not another reboot idea. We don't need any more. And yes, I agree. But also, what do you know about the Munsters, really? A prequel movie came out recently, but did you see it? I don't think most people did. Same with the 2012 pilot. No one saw it except for me, apparently. The Munsters is a 60-year-old property already based on existing IP. It's the Universal Monsters, but as a family. It was already derivative. It was never something sacred or untouchable. Reboots, sequels, and remakes have already been tried on this. But unfortunately, we're in a maelstrom of only reboots, sequels, and remakes. To be fair to myself though, I've been thinking about this for years. Since before the Rob Zombie movie was even an announcement, and back when there were rumors that they were making a Munsters show where they clashed with Brooklyn hipsters. Dear God. And then the show Wednesday came out, and I thought, oh man, they used some of the same ideas I had. As if my idea was ever going to get made, and as if I was ever going to make it. So basically, this is never going to become a thing, and it's not even all that cohesive, or detailed. So just let me have this. Not to mention Universal is coming out with a new Monsters-themed park that's supposed to be for all ages. And so far all they have is horror movies coming out, so if they ever want an all-ages IP, the Munsters is sitting right there. But anyways, so first I think it's important to establish tone. I personally believe any Munsters show or property should be a comedy. I think mirth and lightheartedness should still be the foundation of the Munsters. It doesn't mean it can't be spooky or darker around the characters, if darker subjects and events are going on around the characters, but they treat them as normal and joke around them, or it's funny to us to watch them deal with it. It's nothing serious or gross. The 2012 pilot attempted to be an edgier reboot, but the son kills his Boy Scout troop, and we see the grandpa kill an animal with bad CGI. And we see them kill a man and then harvest his heart to replace Herman's. I don't want violence or gore, that's just not what I'm into. Another thing I want to establish in this world was whether or not the Munsters are known to people. Part of the shtick of the Munsters was that they looked different, and so people often screamed in fear at them. But in order to do something I'll touch on soon, I decided to make monsters known, but they're not very common. Most monsters staying underground, not literally, and having their own communities. But the Munsters live out in the human world, and this is important because Marilyn Munster is a character who straddles the world of monster and human. I've made a YouTube short about this before, but I'll be getting more in depth. She looks completely human, but she's partially a monster. And she grew up like one, making her too human for the monsters, but too monster for the humans. Her mother was a vampire, sister to Lily, and I personally like to take her paternal parentage from the movie Munsters Go Home, where her father was Dr. Jekyll, and he accidentally blew up both himself and his wife. Since technically Dr. Jekyll is from the 1800s, I thought it'd make more sense if he was a descendant of the original instead, and that the Jekylls are somewhat notorious for bungling up the science, which is one reason Marilyn goes by Munster. What also plays into a deeper fear for her, Marilyn goes to college for art, but she often helps her grandfather with his own experiments. I think it'd be interesting if she actually had an interest in science, but fears what it could do to her. And helping out her grandpa not only lets her enjoy science for a short time, but also keep an eye on her grandpa to make sure he doesn't hurt himself like her father did. I'm giving this girl major anxiety and trauma, I'm sorry, but I think Marilyn is the most interesting character, and has the ability to be the most complex. For example, her own family thinks she's homely because she doesn't look like a monster, but I have a theory that she is, just doesn't look like one. For example, Lily, who's a vampire, and Herman, who's a Frankenstein monster, have a child, Eddie, who's a werewolf. Eddie probably gets that gene from his grandmother, who presumably was a werewolf. He has an uncle werewolf, but neither of his parents are werewolves. I have a theory that you can only exist as one monster, so there aren't like half vampires, half werewolves out there. And then I think Marilyn only exhibits as a human, but some of her DNA obviously has to come from her vampire mother, and so I think that she can stomach some of the things like stews that her aunt makes. So I like to think Marilyn is a little more like hardier than a normal human. Like she can, like I said, stomach weirder food or can take injuries better. Something like that. Just to drive in the point that she's not completely human to the other humans. which makes her more of an outcast, yes, but I think that also makes better show and more compelling for a character, more than, oh, this boy likes me, I like him, I bring him home to my family, and then he screams and runs away, and I don't know why. I think it's because of me, but it's really because of her family, because he thinks they're all monsters. Which, by the way, if she thinks her family's right in that she's homely looking, why does she like these guys? It kind of feels like she just likes any guy who asks her out because her self-esteem is that low, which is really sad. So then we're on to Eddie. Eddie is the youngest. In the show, he's like 6 or something, but I wanted to age him up a little bit to at least middle school, so he could have more varied storylines. Or like actual storylines at all. And one of the things about the Munsters is that they look different. You should be able to tell they're monsters, adding to the whole Marilyn is different thing. In the original show, Eddie, who is based off of the Wolfman, is given a widow's peak and dressed like a small Victorian child. This all works to make him look like a mini adult. He doesn't really look like a kid, so to keep the physical differences while not making him look too odd, I gave him wolf ears and fangs. Not only is it a physical indicator of his inhumanness, but I also wanted to be part of his character that having his ears like that is due to the fact that he can't really control his shifts with how young he is. And yes, I decided to do like a shifts into wolf rather than the actual Wolfman thing, because that was mostly due to the technology they had at the time, but I digress. So I wanted to be like a bit of an embarrassment for him that he can't control his shifts or his ears. I also thought it'd be interesting to give him the sort of storyline similar to Dash's in The Incredibles. Realizing that a werewolf boy in a normal human school, he'd probably be too good at sports and the like, something that may put him at odds with his friends who think it'd be unfair for whoever got the werewolf to be on their team. I guess kind of like what happened to Aang in Avatar. It's also something I feel like he and Marilyn could bond about, like how the humans treat them. And as for his clothes, I wanted to give him like normal, obviously boy clothes, but as a werewolf, I didn't want to go for the obvious rips in his clothes, he's a werewolf. I did give him a little chain at the little nod, but I also thought it'd be interesting if that was also a like, point of contention between him and his parents, because as I said in the original show, he's dressed like a little Victorian child, and his parents are obviously like hundreds of years old. So I think it'd be interesting if there was him wanting to be like a modern werewolf, emphasis on still wanting to be a werewolf, by the way, and not wanting to fit in and be a human. But he wants to be a werewolf for the modern generation. And his parents not understanding why he wouldn't like the clothes they pick out, because it's obviously the clothes they grew up with, and they think it's still in style, even if it's not. And now on to their Frankenstein's monster, Herman Munster. Get it? Her-man. He's the titular dad of the family. He's often cracking jokes and puns, which in a world with monsters means a lot of spooky monster puns. I like to say if Gomez and Morticia are the overly amorous theater kids, then Herman and Lily are like the class clown and the popular girl who genuinely loves him, full of mirth and fun and laughter. Herman works at a funeral home in the original show, but he once tried a job as a welder, which actually quite appealed to me, or at least theoretically, because I thought it'd be interesting, like, in a workplace comedy type situation where Herman wears a welder's mask, and his colleagues are able to talk to him easily. But when he takes it off, they give him a wide berth, and he really doesn't understand why, but it's like because they're afraid to talk to him when he looks like a monster, but when he's covered up, they don't have a problem. And that could lead to like shenanigans or at least confusion or other things that I think could be really interesting. Other than just, ooh, he's spooky. He's a person made up of dead people and he works in a place where there's dead people. I don't know, it just feels like kind of too on the nose for him. But that's just my opinion. Oh, and by the way, if you didn't know, the Munsters is a Universal property, which is why Herman can look like the original Frankenstein's monster, because Universal has the copyright to that likeness, so other studios can't use the flat top head, green skin, and neck bolts all in conjunction for their own version. But I didn't go straight up Frankenstein's monster for Herman. It's still obviously Frankenstein's monster, but I think it's just a little more modern maybe, so he's not going to blend in with other people, but I don't think he looks like a lumbering, bumbling monster, if that makes sense. And then we have Lily. So Lily is a vampire. She's named after the flower often associated with death, and her clothing is supposed to evoke the imagery of a funeral shroud. And of course, she has a shocking streak of white hair as a nod to the film The Bride of Frankenstein, because of course she is the bride of a Frankenstein's monster. So I don't want to make Lily like a modern woman learning to work or getting back in the workforce or anything, because number one, she's not a modern woman. She's centuries old, and two, it's totally fine for her to stay a mom. I mean, she has the whole house in a dungeon to clean all day, and of course she has the cooking to do, and that's a full-time job. Now, of course, as already addressed in the original show, Lily can have situations where she'll unknowingly butt heads with neighbors or even the PTA. And as the parent of a werewolf and a human, I'd also think it would be interesting if she's concerned with how she can cater to both their needs, because she's neither of those things. Like, how to handle a young, rambunctious werewolf without calling in her brother, who is a werewolf. Or, why do my niece's boyfriends keep running away? Though she is a woman out of time, being that she's an old vampire, and I did want her and Eddie to clash about clothes at least, because I think the Victorian getup didn't really work for him. I don't want it to turn into Lily versus technology or the modern world. I just don't think that's very fun. More like they have their own traditions and way of doing things that can clash with the modern world. And then we have the grandfather. Let's just forget about him, because I sure did. When I first sketched this, I just completely forgot to draw him in, because I didn't really include him in the main family dynamic, despite him being a part of my story for Marilyn. And then I quickly added him in, and then when I did his line work and coloring, I was sick. I still am, if you can't tell. So what can I say about him is, he's a funny grandpa who's been around the block and gets himself into some sticky situations with whatever experiments he's working on in the basement, or just flitting around the world. He's not a character I would highlight, but he's still a part of the family, and I think it's important to at least include him in the family portrait. So there you have it. This is what I would do with the Munsters, and you may not like it. That's totally fine. Again, this is never going to happen. But I think it could just be more interesting to focus on these aspects of the Munsters. I mean, the Munsters are full of camp, early 60s camp, and I'm not very good at making camp or conceptualizing it. But if any of you want to try it, like creating your own modern-day camp version of the Munsters, I think that'd be pretty cool. But anyways, thanks for watching, and have a good day!